My name is Donna Berg, and I am talking with Alla Rabinovich on Wednesday, July 12th, 2006, as part of the Video History Project of the Milwaukee Jewish Historical Society. First of all, I'd like to start by finding out something about you, your full name, married woman, maiden name, and where and when were you born?
My name is Alla Rabinovich, and my maiden name the same. I am widow. I was born in Ukraine, Chernigov.
And does your family name have a special meaning?
Besides having the common Jewishness name, which all the jokes about in Jewish jokes is about Rabinovich. Nothing more meaningful than that.
Well, tell me a quick one.
Well, nothing comes to my mind again, but
right.
What about your name, Alla? Is that a Russian name?
Alla is, I talked recently with my mother about it, who I was named after. It was her grandfather, Eli, and she said that she wanted my father to register me under the Alla. But somehow he did not remember. By the time he went to the place where he has to register, he made it as Alla. And later I find out that, actually in this country, I found out that Alla comes from Alexandra, which is Savior, and I didn't know that before.
Oh, that's interesting.
How long have you been in this country?
Almost 18 years.
Did you come directly to Milwaukee?
Yes.
You did?
Yes.
Were there other people that were part of your family that were already
Yes.
here?
Yeah. Oh, were here or came with me?
Both. Two questions.
Yes, my husband's family was here, and that's why we picked Milwaukee. And my mother, my son, and my husband came with me.
Okay. Who were your first family members to settle in this country?
I would say my husband's family, who arrived here about 10 years prior to us.
What year was that?
It was in 1979.
Okay. And what brought them here, both to this country and maybe to Milwaukee?
To Milwaukee, I think that through their friends, they find out that this is a nice community to live in. And to the States, it was the reason then a younger generation wanted to improve their lives and not to raise children in anti-Semitic country.
And
So younger generation, which is brother and sister or my late husband, encouraged the parents to, when they all came at the time.
so conditions were very poor for Jews at that
Always,
time?
I would say, still is.
In what way, Alla? Can you explain to us?
It all was differently bad for some people. For some people, it was no promotion on a job. For some people, it was a quota as how many people of Jewish ethnicity can be accepted on this particular job. In some places, you can't even dream to go to certain colleges. Some people used to work in their organizations. The government was very unhappy if they would leave
Really?
because of certain information, which at the time already was old, but it was government way of fracturing probably society. Because on one hand, the anti-Semitism would come from the top, and it was what I call vertical, coming down to the general population. On the other hand, when Jews would leave, they would make all the obstacles possible. That was very confusing to me when I was growing up. That if you don't want us here, why don't you let us go? And so as far as how I did encounter that happens at 6 years old. When there was a mixture of all nationalities where I used to live in Chernigov, Ukrainian town, maybe as size of Milwaukee. And I came home once, my mother, I always assumed I'm Ukrainian because I was born in Ukraine. And I asked my mother, who am I by nationality? In this country, nationality does not have a separate line in passport. In that country it was. It was not religious beliefs. But since we happen to have the same word for that, Jewish as ethnicity and Jewish as religious, so the answer was, you are Jewish. And I started asking questions, why? And she explained why, because it comes from the family. And the reason I did ask, because younger kids, I was 6, and younger kids, I remember this little boy who I was always afraid of. He ran up to me accusing of me being guilty of killing Lenin and Christ. This is what made me to go to my mother and ask. I believe since that I find out my identity, not religiously again, but ethnically, and I probably was aware of it later on in my life. Not, of course, at that time, but if I look back how I lived and acted, I think I always stayed with that.
How did your family impart Jewish tradition, if they did, to you? Or did you have schooling aside from this anti-Semitic kind of reaction to you? What was your Jewish atmosphere, or did you have?
I was born in 1950 when the religious institutions were almost non-existent in every religious beliefs. Was not. However, some churches still were, and it was a little bit more flexible. Government was more flexible toward them than toward the synagogues. And synagogues were not existing at the time. They were closed up. My grandparents, which is mother and father of my father, were Orthodox religious people. So we lived in the same house with them. However, my father decided to take the new way of country development, and he asked his parent to let him be free on that subject. So I went to regular public school that taught there is no God, there is atheistic society, and I grew up between what I call two religions, because my family, my father mostly, he was sincerely devoted to the new social way of the country. And he believed in that communism is the future. So his religion was communism. My grandparents' religion was Orthodox Judaism. My grandmother's sister lived next door, and her husband was a sheikh. So they were observant also, not as much as my grandparent, but I observed always how people come to the sheikh. I had seen him doing it. My own grandparents were practicing their beliefs secretly. And I had observed a lot of minions in my house. And when I was younger and could go outside and watch for any signs of danger, my grandfather would ask me to do it. And I would go outside and stay by the fence and kind of look in if somebody comes in or if somebody wants to visit, and if the people shouldn't know, I would come in the house and tell them that somebody is coming.
Did you encounter instances of having to intercede and?
No.
No.
No, not as I can recall. And I remember my grandfather was of amazing devotion to that. He would have pneumonia, but he would go to Minyan. If it's not in our house, he would go somewhere, and of course it's walking distance. But it's about an hour and a half walk.
Now, did they speak only Russian, or did they speak?
No, they actually spoke Yiddish.
Yiddish.
They spoke Yiddish, and this is where I picked up. However, they did speak Russian and Ukrainian, and Yiddish mostly would come into play when they don't want me to know, and this is how we pick up certain words.
Right.
And I did ask my grandfather certain questions that I was not clear in it. Of course, I couldn't be clear. I always was confused between what I was taught from family, my immediate family, and schooling. And here the kashrut, and here no light on Fridays. Although my grandfather did a funny thing that I found out only when I came to this country and talked with rabbis, that he would wait for me to come from school to flip the light switch. And the rabbi who I asked here when I came here, he said, no, even you not religious, I mean not observant, you're still Jewish. He could not use you for that.
Right.
And many times I would come and light is on, and I'm thinking, but how come light is on? And he'd say, oh, it's a hook for the towel next to it, so I accidentally did it. So I said, can't you do it accidentally every Friday?
So your Jewish education was not a formal Jewish education?
Not
just
at all.
observing the practices of your grandparents? Did they light candles?
Yes,
They were
yes.
able to maintain kashrut?
Yes, yes, we had separate kitchens. Our immediate family, my mother was cooking in a separate place, almost outside the house. And they used their cooking stuff for that. The only exception my father made as far as participating in their rituals was the Pesach. I still like it to call Pesach, not Passover. I knew it as a word, Pesach, and I loved that holiday, especially being youngest in the family.
The exception being what?
Participating in the rituals and tradition,
Okay.
because in the beginning he said that he will be out of it completely.
So you had some confusion in your identity until you got older? You said
No,
it wasn't?
no. Identity-wise, I knew that I'm Jewish. And religiously, I knew I'm atheist.
Okay.
It was no confusion as far as identity. I still
So,
felt Jewish, and every time I encounter something unfair because I am Jewish, I cannot rule out that we would be prone to exaggeration when we would not know the real reason. Sometimes it's more obvious than others.
were there instances in school that created problems with the young people, your friends, who were not Jewish?
Not in my school. When I grew up, actually, in my class, we had 4 Jewish kids. 3 out of them had the last name, Rabinovich.
Okay.
So when the teacher would call the name, everybody puts their head down. I don't want to be the one. Then they have to say by the first name.
I have a question. What did your dad do to earn a living, and were you well off?
He was an optician. We were probably considered to be better provided than other people on the street, which on the street we were only one Jewish family. Because my mother was working and my dad was working, and she was an accountant in a place where she worked until the day we left. Right after war, they met in evacuation, and they came to that place because of my dad's parents. My mother's parents lived in Belarus. So they came to this house that still was there. And my dad went to school. My mother was, by education, she was a teacher. So she only could find that job, and she grew on that job. And at the time when I was born, was 5 years later, that they were working very hard to make the end meet, but we were not hungry by any means. Although I remember that we could not have the first strawberries when it comes in May, my favorite, because it's too expensive. We had to wait until end of June. So, and I never could have a new clothes because my sister, 5 years older, I always had those clothes hand down to me. And one of those kids' memories when finally they got me that burgundy-colored new coat when I was 7, like your blouse. My grandparents said, "Why are you wasting money on that? She can use Rimas." And Rimas was very bleak green by the time. I am still upset when I'm thinking about it. They took half of it from my shoulder. I was 7 years old. They took it off, returned it, and I got Rimas. So,
Do you have any other siblings besides this sister? Is she here?
yes, she came 2 years later after we came.
What does Jewish mean, being Jewish to you mean?
Being Jewish to me, the way I described how I was brought up to my identity, meant to resist the hater that was around me and to show this is the way I was born, and I'm not going to change my name like other people did. I am not going allowed to say dirty jokes about Jews in my present. We can do it among ourselves, whatever we choose to do. But in my presence, when people would not recognize me as a Jew or were too comfortable, I would indirectly, because didn't want to offend their feelings as well, I would make known that it's not appropriate to do in my presence. I also, when I was active at work in certain committees, and I could see that other people of Jewish nationality as not treated as well, and they not were as much outspoken as I was, I would, by the privilege of being on the committee, I would stood up for them. And that made me feel very satisfied to maintain that identity. This is how I was trying to help them and myself. Not always was pleasant. However, I kept it. And I remember my boss from the place where I worked, before I left, decided to leave and handed him the paperwork. He was half Jewish, and his wife was half Jewish, and he was one of those who is trying to not show that, who would do what expected and blend in more than just like everybody else, but have a step forward. And he said, "Aren't you afraid to go?" I said, "Yes, I'm afraid to go, but I am more afraid to stay." That when I already had my son and he was a teenager, and I saw what worse condition coming to him, and the army that they did not behave even to each other, so what you expect from Jews.
Now, I'm interested in knowing how, whether there were any negative reactions to your outspokenness.
Sure.
There was.
Sure.
How did it get demonstrated?
Well, sometimes it wouldn't be done as easily. Of course, they would not just do because I said so. But if I would support what I have to say about that person with the facts that you did not punish this other person with the same mistake, why do you have to punish this person with this mistake? And I knew that this is why. And that what gave me probably the confidence to stand up with them, because I didn't do it when they are really screwed up a lot, and they deserve it. But when I saw unfairness, that people do the same thing, but somebody get punished more than another, of course, in this country, everywhere it's happened, but at least that type of way, Jewish, not Jewish, is not always as visible.
How did you transmit to your son the reason that you were leaving? Did it have to do with this Jewish identity? Did you bring that up to him?
You know, at that time, when we were living in 1989, it already was third wave of opening the doors. And I don't believe that I had to even explain to him, because a lot of people were living around us, their circle was smaller and smaller. And I should say that before Gorbachev came to the power, I was as naive as my father. It was in the genes, and I was really believing. I was really active in making the life better. And maybe my identity also was working on it as far as Jewish people and in the country. So as I could in my own place, I was trying to improve it, and I thought that it's working until Gorbachev came to the power, and what he said very loud that I could not deny, and I could not pretend that this is not what underground people saying to me. It was very clear to me that my son will not have even the quality of life I used to have, neither financially or emotionally or socially. He had, it's already third generation, he had in school a teacher who was non-Jewish, but she was married to a Jewish person. And when we would work on the grades, he came home once and said, "Mom, why did she say so? What did she say?" She said, "You don't have to work on your grades. You are Jewish. You're not going to go to the college anyway." People were so uneducated emotionally about those things that they, even she's married to a Jew, and and she's a teacher, and she still did not have a sheikhel not to say it. So when those things start coming up, and I thought, and my husband, my late husband, came to visit his parents here 2 years prior to our leaving. That why for my son it was when he came back and he knew that he is here visiting, it all was in the air in the talks and everything else. So when we decided to go, it was not a big shock for him.
I have a question. Your parents came before you did.
His parents.
His parents.
My
His parents.
husband's parents.
I see. Okay.
In 79.
Okay. So when you came here, tell us about what it was like in terms of making a living and adjusting to life here. You're smiling.
I should say that if I look back now, all that I am answering questions now, I only can answer in comparison when I'm looking back. At that time, it was not the same feeling about everything that's going on. And I should say, before I'll tell you how it was then, I should tell you how it is now, today, how I feel. Because it's like for me going in the end of the book to know whether I will cry in the end or get ready for a happy ending. So I should say that I obtained my place in this country without no illusion that this is a heaven. I feel more I belong here, more at home than I ever did in that life. And I really think that some higher power that I didn't believe in does exist. I worked toward understanding of it all those years in different ways, and I've come to my own special relationship with that. I only know that it wouldn't be for that, I would never make it. So when I first came here, I decided I had no English skills, I had no driving skills, and therefore I decided I cannot have any skillful job, no matter what is my background. And luckily, I did find a job as their data entry at the Fleet Mortgage Company. Now it is Washington Mutual, I believe. And I learned there what it is to be on a job in this country. And I finally realized this job is not letting me grow. Because from what I heard from everybody around, the people who came earlier, they would say, once you got a job, you got language learned, you got your money, you got everything going for you, you learned. It didn't happen to me. I soon realized I'm sitting there behind a computer, I can learn those numbers to put in and make labels for 12 hours a day, which I did from day one, and it's not enough money to live, and it's not learning language, and it's not promoting myself any further. That was not much to grow within the company. So I went to MATC. Of course, all that time, from day one, I started learning English as a second language in all possible sources. And I was there, and I put myself on the waiting list as tests show. The professional tests I took prior to that showed that I am good in medical field. So I put myself on the waiting list to all the medical professions that they were available. Nursing, X-ray, physical therapy, all that they had at MATC. And I still was taking general courses toward that programs because they had almost similar general courses credits. And I thought that, and I worked. So I worked and going to school. And in about 6 months versus 3 years that they told me will take, they sent me a letter that I can be accepted into the X-ray school. And by this time, I already working in a different department. They promoted me to accountant, and they treated me excellent. That company was absolutely best company I ever worked for. I altogether worked for 9 months there. And I started bringing more people. They liked my way of working, and they trusted my words, and I recommend somebody, the people were accepted there. And I had really hard time to say to my manager that I have to leave. So I remember that scene. I was crying, and he said, "No, you need to grow."
How did you open the door for yourself with, as you say, no language skills? How did you get them to accept you?
That's an interesting question because
How'd you get that job?
Yeah.
I was told by one of the people that was a hairstylist that lived here very long time, and she knew her client worked there, and that client mentioned that they have openings. So she told me where the company is. It used to be in downtown, which for me it was bus route, and I came for interview with the dictionary. I was carrying my dictionary everywhere. Before I was living in that country with all the things that I had to do, I also took a couple months of English course, which wasn't much, of course. And it was English, because the country wasn't open enough to know American language. So whatever I did know, it didn't get me far because it was different. So I did come for a first interview with that dictionary, and we had for 2 hours conversation with human resources, and she mainly asked me about life in former Soviet Union, how big the lines are. And I am working on it hard, thinking, why do you interested in those lines? And then in the end, she's saying, I have 3 more people to interview. I'm so frustrated. I'm thinking, why did you keep me here for 2 hours? If you have 3 more people, of course you will get them, not me, with no language skills. And that's what happened. She didn't get me. That was not a human resources person. It was one of the managers. But the human resources, Gretchen, called me a week after that, and took me about 15 minutes to understand, are you calling me for next interview? She said, yes. And that time it was a different person. It was Scott, about my son's age, and I am again with my dictionary, openly using it. And he did not mind it, and we talked with him again. He didn't ask about lines in the former Soviet Union, but I asked him myself, do you also have 3 more people for interview? I did not know it's a canned phrase at the time. And he said, yes, why are you asking? I'm saying, because why are you wasting time with me? You're not going to accept me versus people who do speak good language. And his answer was, he was 23 years old. His answer was, I'm looking for quality people, not how they speak. And another canned phrase was, if you have any questions, feel free to call me. So when I left from him, he told me that he will have to talk to his department manager, and he will call me in about 3-4 days. The same day, I took it literally what he said, and I did have a question. And I called him back, and I said, Scott, you can take me, show me what to do, and see if I can learn it. And if I want for a week, then you don't take me. He laughed hard, and he said, no, it's against the policy. At the time, word policy for me was the same as police. I did not know the meaning of the word policy. But instead of 4 days, he called me in 2 days and told me that I got a job. And this is how I got a job. I think it's all God's way. And of course, that was wonderful because I had the route of the bus. And Scott I worked 12 hours a day from a first day, and he said, "You don't understand, you can start tomorrow." I said, "No, I do understand. I have to call my family, and that's all, because I needed to work." So they called me every time, overtime in different departments, and I was always surprised why other people don't take it. Don't they need money? They complain about not having enough, and they don't do it. So late at night, he would take me to the bus stop on Wisconsin Avenue. That's so to make sure that I know where I'm going and I'm safe. It was excellent people who treated me very, very nicely.
Since you've been here, have you found any groups or agencies that are, quote, Jewish that you've become a member of or worked for, done any volunteer work? What's been your experience in the Jewish community in Milwaukee?
I was a member of Emmanuel in first few years, about 5 or 6. And they also were very helpful as far as bringing food packages for every holiday and inviting us for holidays as well. But when I acquired enough language and felt appreciated, and they called me, it was after I graduated from X-ray school, they called me about some questions and work as far as Russian community. I offered them to do whatever they can use me for, to invite people to the temple or to work with them and to translate to the degree I could at the time. And they never followed up with that. That was a little disappointing, and therefore their services, when I started attending, didn't get through to me from what I had felt. I live a lot by my feelings, and I felt from what I at the time explored in religious areas, for me, I had to have the feelings of attraction. I did try to talk with them in between sessions, something, and I did not feel the sincere interest.
Them
Being cantor or rabbi or people who are in charge there, I felt it's done as a work. And therefore, I did not become a regular member after all expired.
Can we just back up a minute? How did you decide you became a member of Emmanuel? You had heard the name in the community. How did you?
Initially, it was our American family, we call them. That was the volunteers who would call Jewish Federation and ask for the family to help them out.
Oh,
And
yeah.
we had that great family who we were become very close with, and they signed us
I see.
for that membership. It was free for us at the time, and they were members of this temple, and this is how we were members for that time.
So since that time, can we say it's fair to say that they kind of turned you off in terms of?
Without knowing it, yes.
Yes.
I was searching and looking, and I did come with friends of mine. I started, at the time I went to another school, which is ultrasound school, and I graduated, and I already started working finally on regular basis without schooling and working and not knowing where I am. And I started exploring their society, and I joined the Jewish singles group that was working on the basis of JCC with a grant from Helen Badger Foundation. And that was all ages in that group, and this is where I found Rabbi Freyler, who was doing activities with this group and talks and seminars and very interesting activities that I could see where do I fit in a community. And I acquired a lot of friends through that participation. and it lasted about 4 years. And when I did, I started also feeling very appreciative to the group that embraced me as well. And with the friends that I acquired, we started doing activities ourselves, helping to it, and giving back the same way as it started, because they had paid staff, but they needed volunteers as well. And later on, I found Kathy, that I felt that I want to not miss out this museum and a rich history of elderly Jewish population who will not come here to speak for themselves because they are not having language skills.
That's very nice of you to do that. So that must give you some sense of satisfaction.
You know, it's what I call even selfish sometimes, because when I do preparation for those interviews, they have to let me in something so deep that they don't ever talk about, and that may not even come up in an interview. But when I have a feeling of the person, and then we prepare what to talk, because we have less time. We have, between translation, we have 30 minutes versus hour for everybody else. Then we make in a plan. However, I also learned so much from those people, and they let me in their heart. They let me in their soul. They become a part of family.
Would you say that that's a major part of what you've learned during your lifetime, is helping these people open up? Or is there some other experience that you've had that to you has been the most important lesson in life?
I think that the test that I took before I ended up in medical field probably was very, very accurate.
Mm-hmm.
I find myself, before I joined that even social group of Jewish singles, I find myself that I have a need to give. And I purposely using the word need.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, I start feeling it's unhealthy. I start talking to myself and saying, Alla, unless you do something for people, this is how you can exist. And you expect the appreciation. You want to be needed. You need to be needed. I did not think psychologically it's very healthy. However, it didn't stay with me for a long time as a problem. And when I start working in medical field, especially for the last 5 years, I am in an organization that gives a lot of avenues to improve as far as caregiver. And we're all medical field, we are caregivers. And in my specialty now as an ultrasound technologist, I have people one-on-one with me. And I learned through other sources that, besides our organization, how to handle emotions and how to help other people work with emotions. I trying it on my patients, and I'm very happy when they coming in on any medical test. 90% of us come in not in a good shape. Doesn't matter what kind of test it is. And any wrong word from a medical professional sometimes can be accidentally ruining the whole day. Mm-hmm. So I've learned through all that other experiences, and I am giving it to my patients, and I see that it's working, because they live in my room in better shape than they came in, and I feel that as a very significant part of my life. I have very difficult situation at work, but I'm not leaving because of that. So I see that as far as those elderly from Russian community, I think I want their part in memories. I want that part for the generations to come. I don't think that I'm doing much for them. I went once on a Passover to my friend when Haggadah was somebody's life, patriarch of a family who came to this country 100 years ago, written and translated, and they read that as a Haggadah. Mm-hmm. Everybody did. And I had chills ever since. Everybody who I can get through to from any age, I'm saying you have to leave it for your children. You have to write, you have to talk on a video or on an audio anyway. And my elderly people also, when I invite them here, they would say, oh, my grandchildren will not know English, Russian, I'm saying. And it doesn't matter. I see a lot of people, other ethnic groups, who say, sorry, I lost my roots. And that's what makes me feel, again, back to this Passover, how I felt listening to those pages of history of this particular life, and how it's essential for us to be rooted, to know where we came from. Because one time we may start thinking, who was my grandfather? Who was my grandmother? And maybe knowing that this museum has the tape, maybe I will go and learn Russian. Or, therefore, I am doing it in English as well, so it will be easier.
Maybe you're really helping, say, those elderly to reconnect with their beginnings, and you said that they're often very closed and difficult for them to open up, but maybe you've opened a path for them to make some sort of peace and transition.
Rethinking some of them, yes, some of them, but some of them still say no to me, although I know that they have a lot of material to
That's
give.
wonderful work that you're doing, it really is.
Thank you.
So, in looking back over where you came from and where you are today, is there some moment or some task that you've performed that you are particularly proud of?
I faced my closet 2 weeks ago myself.
Okay.
All by
Was
myself.
that the happiest moment in your life?
Well, no, I'm trying to make a joke. Because I never analyzed anything that I am doing as proud. And that's why I made this joke, because this is when I felt proud. I put all together myself. Rest of those things that I do, I feel very satisfied. And that's how I would describe my feelings.
They ask here, is there something about yourself that you think no one knows?
Of course.
Okay. Is that something you want to share?
No, then it will not be something that no one knows anymore.
How would you like to be remembered? Is there...
I would like to be remembered as somebody who approached life with a smile, who wanted to make other people smile.
That's lovely. Is there anything else that we have or haven't talked about that you would like to expand on or open up?
I can say a couple words about my son, who, this is where I probably would use, I am proud of him. However, I don't take all the credits that I made him the way he is. That's why I'm not proud of myself, but I am proud of him. And I should say that he does follow in my steps sometime, only because other people saying, look in the mirror when you're asking these questions. This is why he's doing it. Although it's probably in the genes that came from my father, came to me and came to him. He is very much of a person who lives and breathes to make a difference. He does not brag about it too that much. When he was growing up, he would do all for neighbors and things, and neighbors would come and tell me, thank you, I'll bring a little souvenir, and this is when I would find out. And when I would ask him, he'd say, I didn't have to tell you everything I'm doing. And he is 31 years old, God bless his heart, till 120. And he joined the reserve, and now he switched to National Guard. He got married last month.
You what?
Got married last month.
Mm-hmm.
And that's still not keeping him from what he himself calls his mission. He's in police force. He graduated from the college, but he is in police force to be where he feels he is needed the most. And he's trying to find the places to volunteer, like fire departments, and dive in places where they save people's lives in his community where he lives. This is kind of person he is. And when I feel he went to Hurricane Katrina, and he is progressing into the army to where units where the places more likely to go to Iraq. And I am only more and more believing in higher power and asking God to keep him safe.
Does he share your ideas about identity as a
Yes.
Jew?
Yes, absolutely.
So
And
you've
he,
managed to perpetuate that.
I don't know how, again, I give him all that credits, because when I would talk with him about it and ask, and he said, Mom, you don't know about it, but I've done that and that, and I learned that and that. He actually had married non-Jewish girl, but they had chuppah. We invited the rabbi, and he feels that and searching still for that in the little steps that he's looking for answers. And yes, he has mezuzah, and I always, even being non-observant, I always had the feeling, I just want it. Like I said, my feelings tells me what I want. I wanted the Star of David. I never taken off for all those years. And I wanted mezuzah first thing that I came to this country. I probably have more Jewishness in me, even spiritually, that I ever was aware of. Wherever it comes from, but he does it the same thing, and he always touches mezuzah when he comes in and living, and he, yes, have that identity as well.
You've been very sharing and very open, and it's really been a pleasure to get a glimpse of you, and I do thank you
Thank
a
you
lot.
so much. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
My pleasure.